This is Donna with More Than a Review, and I am honored to be here today with Jack Carr. And he has served in the military, and then he's also writing books now, which I think is fascinating. You can do something so active and then write. Like, I think it would be hard to sit still.
There's a lot of similarities, actually. We can get into that.
Oh, that's great. So love to hear, because I think my readers will be new to your writing. So kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and then how you did end up writing.
All right. Yeah, so I grew up with a mother who was a librarian and who still is to this day.
We love you.
Hey! All right, Mom. And so I grew up surrounded by books from a very early age, and she instilled a love of reading in us. And I always knew I was going to go in the military, and I think that's because my grandfather was killed in World War II. He was killed off Okinawa in 1945, near the end of the war. But I grew up with the silk maps they gave aviators back then. They get paper maps and they hit the water, they disintegrate. So I had those, his medals, pictures of him in his squadron. He flew a plane called the Corsair, which flew off aircraft carriers and had the wings that folded up. And of course, when I was little, right around that time when I was becoming very interested in all this, there was a show on TV called Black Sheep Squadron with Robert Conrad, and so I was enamored with that show. I think I got a lot of my leadership style from that show. They were always fighting and drinking in that show for some reason, and I don't know how my mom let me watch it, but my dad did. So, and then on Sundays, my dad would watch football, and I was not interested in football at all, but what I was interested in was the war movie that was playing opposite the football game. So there was ABC, CBS, NBC, and then the one outlier channel that always had just a war movie playing. And so when it was a commercial, my dad would look at his watch and say, go, and I was a remote control, so I'd run up to the TV and I'd change it to that movie and I'd watch it, and then turn it back and I'd turn it back, and then I'd wait for the next commercial. And in one of those movies, there was a show called The Frogmen, and it was an old black and white movie that showed these guys swimming up over beaches and putting explosives on obstacles in advance of a conventional force landing. And I asked my dad, hey, who are these guys? And he said, those are frogmen. And I said, what are those? And he said, shh, football's on. So ask your mother. So I went and asked my mom, and we did some research at the local library, because she took every opportunity to get us down there and get us in those stacks of books and teach us how to look up things on our own. And back then you could read everything on SEALs in about an hour, nonfiction-wise, early 80s, mid-80s, because there wasn't that much written. And in about 5th grade, I really switched over from the young adult reading into the things that my parents were reading. So it's about the time Hunt for Red October came out. So I was reading Tom Clancy, Nelson DeMille, David Morrell. 5th grade, 10, and for sure by 11, for sure by 6th grade. Guys like A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden, these guys in the 80s who wrote stories with protagonists that had backgrounds that I wanted to have in real life one day. Typically they had backgrounds in Special Forces, SEALs, CIA guys in Vietnam, and then they were in the 80s doing some other stuff, and that's what I was reading about. So I knew that one day I'd go into the military, and I wanted to test myself to see if I could become a SEAL, serve my country in uniform, and then after I was done with that, I'd write fiction. So that was my path, and I really never wanted to do anything else. Both were callings, both were professions. So there's a reason that it's called the profession of arms and not the career of arms. And that's how I look at this too. It's a profession, and I love it, and I feel very fortunate to be doing it each and every day.
Wow. So any skills from being a SEAL that come over into your writing?
Yes, some good and some bad. And I'll start with the bad, in that I go all in on everything. So when you're in the SEAL teams, especially in a leadership position, you have to be all in all the time, because that's what you owe the guys that you're taking downrange to Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what you owe their families. That's what you owe the mission, the country. So that pendulum is over on the side of the team and the mission, and your family has to understand that. Like, the team has to come first. Now that I'm on the outside, the pendulum is supposed to swing back this way towards the family, but I just go all in on everything that I do. I don't know how to really take a breath yet. So those are some discussions in our household that I need to get a little better about, realizing that, hey, you know what, if I say no to this or I don't do this, the end result is not someone coming home in a body bag. It's going to be okay. So I just need to work on that. But as far as similarities, I used to solve problems aggressively on the battlefield. And now I do that on the written page, but just the consequences of messing up are a lot less dire. But then I get a little more time to think about it. I can go revise it if I think about something in the middle of the night and come up with a better way to solve a problem, and I can come back and fix it the next day. So the aggressive problem solving, right? Exactly. Real life, you're on the spot. You gotta make that decision and live with it. But in writing, you can make it all up, and you can switch it and revise it and edit it and make that story flow. So there's similarities in that respect, and then I'm still aggressively solving problems. It's just now on the written page.
That's amazing. So how many books have you written so far?
So 2 are out. The Terminal List was the first one,
Okay.
and True Believer is the second, and Savage Son is supposed to come out in April, but because of the Department of Defense review process that I have to go through for fiction, which is ridiculous, it might delay things like last time. So True Believer was supposed to come out April 2nd of last year, but they took about 7 months to do a 30-day review. And 30 days is what the contract says that I signed for my top secret security clearance. But yeah, they took 7 months to do that 30-day review, so we had to push it to July. So I'm hoping that they can do it. They can read this novel that most people read in a few hours or a couple days at least. If they could squeeze that into 30 days, I sincerely appreciate it, Department of Defense. So hopefully we'll get it out there on April 14th.
Okay, several questions. One, let's talk about the actual book and if they're a series or each one standalone. And then what makes the Department of Defense have to review your books?
Right, so we'll start with the Department of Defense one. And when you have a certain clearance in the military or in government service, you sign a bunch of paperwork. And in the small print in there, that you don't really have a choice. You can't, like if you don't sign this stuff, you can't do your job, so you just sign it.
Yeah.
But in there it says that you will submit anything intended for public release. So very broad, obviously by design, which is also a theme that winds its way into the books about government overreach. But if you read the books, you'll see what I mean, and how I deal with some of those characters. Also, it gets a little bit of the frustrations out. So it's very therapeutic to write these things. But 30 days is what it says. They'll get it back in no later than 30 days. So I uphold my side of the bargain, and shocker, the government does not uphold theirs. So that's the reason that I have to do that.
Okay.
So typically, I don't know anybody else that writes fiction that does it. I think it's intended for nonfiction, but it's not written that way. So it gives them the power to target anyone they want to come after, and I think the more successful one is, then that's the person that they're going to go after and make an example of if they decide to do it, or if somebody in the Department of Defense wants to make a name for themselves and go get a SEAL or something. So I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So yeah, that's the reason.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the first one, when I started down this path, so when I was in the military, I knew I was going to write one day, but I didn't think about those stories. I focused just on the mission at hand, and I was studying terrorism, studying insurgency, studying warfare, and then I had the practical application from the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan. So during my last couple of years, I wasn't taking guys downrange anymore. I went to a staff job. I dropped my papers, letting them know, hey, I'm going to get out here and retire. Although I don't like the retire word, because I don't think it's precision in language reflects precision in thought. And when you tell someone for 20 years they're going to retire after 20 with a very meager paycheck coming in, it sets the wrong tone, I think. So, but that once again is another story. So, as those last 2 years, I got to take a breath. I decided I was going to get out, take care of the family, and pursue this next mission in life, this next passion, which is writing. So I wrote down 5 or 6 different ideas, about 1-page executive summaries for each one. And then I decided to go with the Terminal List first, because I loved stories growing up and movies that had that theme of revenge. And I think there's just something that's just visceral and primal about that theme, and I was always drawn to it. So I decided that, hey, this is the one to go with first. There's just something about that story that and it just echoes with us from telling stories around the campfire. Back in that's the one I went with. And then it led into True Believer, which is a story of redemption. I like to call it violent redemption. And then that led into Savage Son, which is the one I really wanted to write first, but it didn't make sense to start with it. And Savage Son is inspired by The Most Dangerous Game, written by Richard Connell in 1924. I read that in 6th grade, and I always knew that one day I would write a novel inspired by the themes of Richard Connell's short story. So that's Savage Son that comes out soon. But yeah, the first one was Revenge Without Constraint, and I growing up loving those movies and those books, there was always something the guy had to lose. But that voiceover in the back of the movie, they always say he had nothing left to lose. And I'm always thinking, well, he did have something. He could die. Like, that's something. And so I needed to make my character think he was dying. And I got that from studying Japanese Bushido, the Code of the Samurai. And they would go into battle thinking they were already dead. So they thought that made them more effective and efficient warriors. And I thought, well, how do I apply that to a modern day warrior with someone that has a background similar to mine? And I got inspired by the church hearings in the mid-'70s, where the Frank Church of Idaho had these series of hearings where they uncovered a lot of abuses by certain elements of the federal government, and amongst those was testing human subjects without their consent. Patients from mental institutions, hospitals, universities, people from the military. And so I thought, well, bring that back and involve this main character in a conspiracy that makes him think he's already dead, so he goes into battle with that mindset and brings the tactics and techniques of the enemy that work so well against us in Afghanistan to home soil. So he essentially becomes the terrorist, becomes the insurgent that he's been fighting for the last 16 years.
Wow. So it is like truth is sometimes stranger than fiction.
There's some echoes of truth that ring throughout the novel, I'd say.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay, I could talk to you forever, but I know we have a time limit here. So tell us one thing any advice you would give to a writer, because it's kind of been a process. So what would you kind of tell people that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so the one thing, there's a couple, but the one thing that was most liberating is when Brad Thor said, give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. And he told me that when I was about 4 months into the writing process. A mutual friend put us together, and he opened the door to this industry for me. I'll never be able to thank him enough. But when he said that, I was like, oh wow. And what he meant really was, don't wait for the stars to align. Don't wait for everything to be perfect to sit down and write. Just sit down, write, do it. You can always go back and edit. So that was very liberating to hear somebody that's been so successful in this industry say, give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. And although that's not, don't take it literally, just sit down and do the work. So that was it. And then he also said, the only difference between a published author and an unpublished author is that the published author never quit. And for me, coming from the SEAL teams and coming from this SEAL training called BUDS, where we have a bell right there that all you have to do to quit to get out of the program is to ring it 3 times and put your helmet down on the ground and you're done and you can be warm again. That really rang true with me. So yeah, those were very, very helpful as I started this journey.
I can see that being helpful for you because you probably didn't have permission to write a bad chapter when you're in the SEALs.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
You want everything to be perfect, and well, I mean, you got to deal with what you have, but especially when you're writing, you want to control that environment. And with 3 kids, a dog, wife, chaos at all times in our house, it is almost impossible to control the environment. So you just got to sit down and do that work.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Both for your
Thank
service,
you so much for having me.
spending time with us. We do appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Do it again soon.
Very good. Thanks.